Welcome back to Classic Stories and Fairy Tales. I'm your host and narrator, Jerry Coble. We are continuing in the book The Life and Adventures of Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. And today we will be reading Chapter 6, Ill and Conscience Stricken. When I came down to the ship, I found it strangely removed. The forecastle, which lay before buried in sand, was heaved up at least 6 feet, and the stern, which was broken in pieces and parted from the rest by the force of the sea, soon after I had left rummaging her, was tossed as it were up and cast on one side, and the sand was thrown so high on that side next to her stern, that whereas there was a great place of water before, so that I could not come within 1/4 of a mile of the wreck without swimming, I could now walk quite up to her when the tide was out. I was surprised with this at first, but soon concluded it must be done by the earthquake, and as by this violence the ship was more broke open than formerly, so many things came daily on shore, which the sea had loosened, and which the winds and water rolled by degrees to the land. This wholly diverted my thoughts from the design of removing my habitation, and I busied myself mightily, that day especially, in searching whether I could make any way into the ship. But I found nothing was to be expected of that kind, for all the inside of the ship was choked up with sand. However, as I had learned not to despair of anything, I resolved to pull everything to pieces that I could of the ship, concluding that everything I could get from her would be of some use or other to me. May 3rd. I began with my saw and cut a piece of a beam through, which I thought held some of the upper part of quarter-deck together, and when I had cut it through, I cleared away the sand as well as I could from the side which lay highest, but the tide coming in, I was obliged to give over for that time. May 4th. I went to fishing, but caught not one fish that I durst eat of, till I was weary of my sport, when, just going to leave off, I caught a young dolphin. I had made me a long line of some rope yarn, but I had no hooks. Yet I frequently caught fish enough, as much as I cared to eat, all which I dried in the sun and ate them dry. May 5th. Worked on the wreck. Cut another beam asunder, and brought 3 great fir planks off from the decks, which I tied together and made to float on shore when the tide of flood came on. May 6th. Worked on the wreck. Got several iron bolts out of her and other pieces of iron work. Worked very hard and came home very much tired, and had thoughts of giving it over. May 7th. Went to the wreck again, not with an intent to work, but found the weight of the wreck had broke itself down, the beams being cut, that several pieces of the ship seemed to lie loose, and the inside of the whole lay so open that I could see into it, but it was almost full of water and sand. May 8th. Went to the wreck, and carried an iron crow to winch up the deck, which lay now quite clear of the water or sand. I wrenched open 2 planks, and brought them on shore also with the tide. I left the iron crow in the wreck for next day. May 9th. Went to the wreck, and with the crow made way into the body of the wreck, and filled several casks, and loosened them with the crow, but could not break them up. I felt also a roll of English lead, and could stir it, but it was too heavy to remove. May 10th through 14th. Went every day to the wreck, and got a great many pieces of timber, and boards or planks, and 2 or 3 hundredweight of iron. May 15th. I carried 2 hatchets, to try if I could not cut a piece off the roll of lead by placing the edge of one hatchet and driving it with the other. But as it lay about 1.5 feet in the water, I could not make any blow to drive the hatchet. May 16th. It had blown hard in the night, and the wreck appeared more broken by the force of the water, but I stayed so long in the woods to get pigeons for food that the tide prevented my going to the wreck that day. May 17th. I saw some pieces of the wreck blown on shore, and at great distance, near 2 miles off me, but resolved to see what they were, and found it was a piece of the head, but too heavy for me to bring away. May 24th. Every day to this day I worked on the wreck, and with hard labor I loosened some things so much with the crow that the first flowing tide several casks floated out, and 2 of the seamen's chests. But the wind blowing from the shore, nothing came to land that day but pieces of timber and a hogshead which had some Brazil pork in it, but the salt water and the sand had spoiled it. I continued this work every day to the 15th of June, except the time necessary to get food, which I always appointed during this part of my employment to be when the tide was up, that I might be ready when it was ebbed out. And by this time I had got timber and plank and ironwork enough to have built a good boat, if I had known how. And also I got, at several times and in several pieces, near 100 weight of the sheet lead. June 16th. Going down to the seaside, I found a large tortoise or turtle. This was the first I had seen, which, it seems, was only my misfortune, not any defect of the place or scarcity, for had I happened to be on the other side of the island, I might have had hundreds of them every day, as I found afterwards, but perhaps had paid dear enough for them. June 17th. I spent in cooking the turtle. I found in her 80 eggs, and her flesh was to me at that time the most savory and pleasant that ever I tasted in my life, having had no flesh but of goats and fowl since I landed in this horrid place. June 18th. Rained all day, and I stayed within. I thought this time the rain felt cold, and I was something chilly, which I knew was not usual in the latitude. June 19th. Very ill and shivering, as if the weather had been cold. June 20th. No rest all night. Violent pains in my head and feverish. June 21st. Very ill. Frighted almost to death with the apprehensions of my sad condition, to be sick and no help. Prayed to God for the first time since the storm of Hull, but scarce knew what I said, or why, my thoughts being all confused. June 22nd. A little better, but under dreadful apprehensions of sickness. June 23rd. Very bad again, cold and shivering, and then a violent headache. June 24th. Much better. June 25th. An ague very violent. The fit held me 7 hours, cold fit and hot, with faint sweats after it. June 26th. Better, and having no victuals to eat, took my gun, but found myself very weak. However, I killed a she-goat, and with much difficulty got it home, and broiled some of it, and ate. I would fain have stewed it, and made some broth, but had no pot. June 27th. The ague again so violent that I lay abed all day, and neither ate nor drank. I was ready to perish for thirst, but so weak, I had no strength to stand up, or to get myself any water to drink. Prayed to God again, but was light-headed, and when I was not, I was so ignorant that I knew not what to say. Only I lay and cried, Lord, look upon me. Lord, pity me. Lord, have mercy upon me. I suppose I did nothing else for 2 or 3 hours, till, the fit wearing off, I fell asleep, and did not wake till far in the night. When I awoke, I found myself much refreshed, but weak, and exceedingly thirsty. However, as I had no water in my habitation, I was forced to lie till morning, and went to sleep again. In this second sleep, I had this terrible dream. I thought that I was sitting on the ground, on the outside of my wall, where I sat when the storms blew after the earthquake, and that I saw a man descend from a great black cloud in a bright flame of fire and light upon the ground. He was all over as bright as a flame, so that I could but just bear to look towards him. His countenance was most inexpressibly dreadful, impossible for words to describe. When he stepped upon the ground with his feet, I thought the earth trembled, just as it had done before in the earthquake, and all the air looked, to my apprehension, as if it had been filled with flashes of fire. He was no sooner landed upon the earth, but he moved forwards towards me, with a long spear or weapon in his hand to kill me. And when he came to a rising ground at some distance, he spoke to me, or I heard a voice so terrible that it is impossible to express the terror of it. All that I can say I understood was this: seeing all these things have not brought thee to repentance, now thou shalt die. At which words I thought he lifted up the spear that was in his hand to kill me. No one that shall ever read this account will expect that I should be able to describe the horrors of my soul at this terrible vision. I mean that even while it was a dream, I even dreamed of those horrors, nor is it any more possible to describe the impression that remained upon my mind when I awaked and found it was but a dream. I had, alas, no divine knowledge. What I had received by the good instruction of my father was then worn out by my uninterrupted series for 8 years of seafaring wickedness, and a constant conversation with none but such as were, like myself, wicked and profane to the last degree. I do not remember that I had, in all that time, one thought that so much as tended either to looking upwards towards God, or inward towards a reflection upon my own ways, but a certain stupidity of soul, without desire of good or conscience of evil, had entirely overwhelmed me, and I was all that the most hardened, unthinking, wicked creature among our common sailors can be supposed to be, not having the least sense either of the fear of God in danger or of the thankfulness to God in deliverance. In the relating what is already past of my story, this will be the more easily believed when I shall add that through all the variety of miseries that had to this day befallen me, I never had so much as one thought of it being the hand of God, or that it was a just punishment for my sin, my rebellious behavior against my father, or my present sins, which were great, or so much as a punishment for the general course of my wicked life. When I was on the desperate expedition on the desert shores of Africa, I never had so much as one thought of what would become of me, or one wish to God to direct me whither I should go, or to keep me from the danger which apparently surrounded me, as well from voracious creatures as cruel savages. But I was merely thoughtless of a God or a providence, acted like a mere brute from the principles of nature and by the dictates of common sense only, and indeed hardly that. When I was delivered and taken up at sea by the Portugal captain, well used and dealt justly and honorably with, as well as charitably, I had not the least thankfulness in my thoughts. When, again, I was shipwrecked, ruined, and in danger of drowning on this island, I was as far from remorse or looking on it as judgment. I only said to myself often that I was an unfortunate dog and born to be always miserable. It is true, when I got on shore first here, and found all my ship's crew drowned and myself spared, I was surprised with a kind of ecstasy and some transports of souls, which, had the grace of God assisted, might have